Now, the US and the EU sit down to trade talks in June. According to the EU's Trade Commissioner, Karel de Gucht, failure is not an option. Just in case he felt he wasn't stretching himself significantly, he's opening similar talks between Japan and the EU in March. Now, together, these two sets of negotiation will encompass half of the world's trade. Until now, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was the mother of all bilateral trade agreements. It may be reduced to being a younger sister if these two deals get off the ground. Well, with me is Herminio Blanco. He's Mexico's chief negotiator for NAFTA. That free trade agreement was done in 1994, wasn't it, I think?
It entered into force in 1994.
But it seems as though we've entered an age of bilateral deals. Is multilateralism, everybody getting around the table, all 190 countries or whatever it happens to be getting around the table and doing a deal, is that dead now, really?
Exactly 158 members of WTO at this point in time. I think WTO keeps being the most relevant organization. There are risks, and one of them, the one that you mentioned, the potential agreement between the US and the EU, is by far the biggest risk.
You call it a risk. It is an attack on the WTO. Do you see it as that?
I see it as a risk. Why a risk? The risk is that the EU and the US will negotiate an agreement that would obviously will have to deal with agriculture. That's a difficult topic. But the agreement will fundamentally have to deal with standards, harmonization of standards across the US and the EU.
But if you get some kind of agreement on standards, doesn't that contribute to something that helps the WTO, a broader agreement, which may eventually come about in time?
It could. But it will tell you, for businessmen, that doing business between the US and the EU is much easier than doing business inside the members of the WTO. And in that sense, the relevancy of WTO will start being at risk.
So you're cutting out those people who aren't involved, not in the EU, not in the US, and presumably NAFTA will be sort of aligned to that agreement in one way or another. But of course it cuts out China, doesn't it?
It cuts out, most importantly, it cuts out the least developed countries, those poorest countries that are members of the WTO, those that do not have an alternative, those that are expecting from this round of negotiations.
When they just fall into line, though, behind it, won't they just come behind and sort of say, OK, these two big powers have done an agreement, these are the standards, so we'll come in and we'll do that, we'll fall in behind.
That's one scenario. One scenario, the US and the EU negotiate this, and then those new rules are brought into the WTO. That's a potential scenario. It happened with NAFTA. What we negotiated in NAFTA was then brought into the WTO when the WTO was founded. But it is, as a threat, it is. But also it's an opportunity. I think many countries that have not moved in these negotiations recently will hear this news as a call to action. And in that sense, it could also advance the WTO. The WTO has to solve the pending negotiations, pending for 12 years now, and then it has to get to write new rules to do business.
But will you replace what's going on between the EU and the US? Let's imagine what goes on between the EU and the US actually succeeds. Will you then have to replace it? Will you add on to it? Will you do something separate from it? How do you fit in with that? How do you fit in with NAFTA, for that matter?
It is not very easy. And by the way, Mexico will start this year, the second semester, negotiations with the EU to make our agreement more modern, make the rules more modern, much in the way that the EU is going to negotiate with the US.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to stop it there. We're running out of time. But thank you very much. I'm sure we could have talked for hours.
We could.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.